All righty. We'll get ready. We'll call.
I'll do a shot. I'll do a shot.
There you go, do a shot.
Hey.
Good morning. Hey, good afternoon. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're looking
All
good and
right.
sounding.
We'll call this meeting to order for the Akron Citizens Police Oversight Board for May the 21st, 2025. We'll begin with a roll call of our board. Anaskevich.
Here.
Gippin.
Here.
Peoples.
Here.
Hawkins.
Here.
Richards.
Present.
Jones.
Here.
Castle.
Here.
Mr. Costa will be absent. Boyd is here.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it means anything, but see the screen? It says we're in executive session. I'm guessing that means it's not working.
Yeah, we have
Yeah,
to start
yeah.
over.
We need to let Matt know that's up.
Well, I was looking at it. Yeah.
Oh, so we're live? Okay.
We're not.
There we go.
What did he say?
We're not in executive session.
I'd like to make a motion for the approval of last meeting's minutes. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Should we start over, Susan?
No, he says no.
All right. The purpose, the overarching mission of the Akron Citizens Police Oversight Board is to foster conditions and police practices that ensure the safety of all residents of the city of Akron. The CPOB is empowered by a new city charter provision to independently direct the police auditor, whose office reviews investigations into complaints and misconduct involving officers. The board and auditor also review every standard investigation, whether by Akron Police Department or outside agencies, into the use of deadly force by an officer. Our values are as follows. Our decision and actions are motivated by our love for Akron and our desire for all to feel safe in our community. We value unity of voice and action. We respect each other and those we serve. We seek to build relationships of trust, and we seek to always conduct ourselves with integrity. We listen to understand, learn, and lead. We strive to be inclusive of all stakeholders' voices. We value change at a system level. We hold ourselves accountable for our actions and deeds, and we hold our partners and those we serve to be accountable for their actions and deeds as well. At this time, we'll move forward. Ms. Anaskevich, any public comment?
Yes. Just a reminder to everyone who's going to give public comment tonight, you have 3 minutes. I have a timer, and when you hear the timer go off, you know that your 3 minutes are up. I won't abruptly stop you in mid-sentence or anything like that, but just please be mindful of the timer and be courteous enough to suspend your comment once you hear the timer go off. So first up is Miss Lee Holden, please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm here to just express my how thrilled I am that it looks like the use of force review and revision is going to move ahead, including a request for proposals for a firm to bring some additional expertise to this work. I don't have to persuade anybody here, I don't think, but for those, maybe others who are listening, it's really important that we take this work seriously. It can't just be one more thing that those who already have busy to-do lists add to their lists. We really need help with this. And so I ask that everyone involved here stay open to what new voices can bring to this process. So I'm very grateful to Mayor Shamus Malik for bringing a revised proposal to City Council. I'm grateful to our auditor, Mr. Fennell, for working with the mayor to clarify the purpose and the scope of the work. I'm grateful to Ms. Jones and Ms. Myers for developing a community engagement process that fits into a multi-pronged plan. And I'm really grateful to the Governance Committee for continuing from the beginning of its existence to shine a light on the need for improvement in the use of force policy. I've learned that we can go beyond the minimum of the Graham standard, as is recommended by the Police Executive Research Forum. So we need a plan. I've heard people say that Akron has tried to put a plan together in the past, and we end up with talk but no action. So I've looked for such a plan, and I've seen descriptions of problems that we face and goals for change, but these aren't a complete plan. We need an agreement, we need agreements on how to get from where we are to where we want to be. And I think now we've got pieces in place in terms of specific expertise coming in with the request for proposals, a community engagement process to build agreements, and local talent to monitor the results and provide follow-through. So I think these are the necessary elements to create and execute a plan. So I ask again that everyone involved please stay open to this.
Thank you, Ms. Holden. Reverend Pamela Pinkey Apostolette, please.
Good evening. I'm trying to figure out how she went before me when I was here before her. Is it because she's a white woman? Because I'm really concerned about that. And when I come down here, Mr. President, I'm very disrespected. I'm very disrespected. Not one woman in this room speaks to me or is polite to me. But you will speak to the white women. I'm here, Mr. President, because I'm being harassed. Today, I got another fraud alert on my bank account. And Akron Police is not doing anything about my matters. These are my police reports just this year. I have a human trafficking report. Someone has broken into my apartment and stolen my birth certificate out of my apartment. This is the second bank account fraud alert I've had. Somebody overdrafted my bank account $300. I'm trying to figure out how are they getting access to me. My building management is coming into my apartment illegally, and APD is doing nothing that it's supposed to do. I heard you say that you have investment in the stakeholders. What about we citizens who are victims? I'm just wondering, are you all planning to do the same thing to me that Cleveland did? These are police reports. I did the reports. These are rape reports and felonies and such. And I'm wondering if Akron is planning on doing the same thing. I reported the rapes of my children, my granddaughter and me. Instead of police doing what they're supposed to do, they put a mental health label on me, while a bunch of women set me up and stole my children from me. I don't know what the rumor is here in Akron. There's nothing wrong with my mind. And I'm tired of people accusing me of that. And if I were mentally ill, that wouldn't give the police the right to deny me justice and to have my matters addressed. I don't like what I'm getting, Mr. President, from Akron Police Department. I don't like what I'm getting from people who are supposed to be in leadership to address my safety and my concerns. You know I'm not a disrespectful person, and you know I have not been since you've known me. Because I'm a preacher and because of my faith does not give anybody the right to disregard my concerns and my safety. I want something done. And I don't want to end up dead where somebody says that I didn't follow the proper procedures. And Mr. President, when I come in here, I get very mean looks from some of these women in this room. And I shouldn't have to feel that way. Thank you. My phone number is 330-428-9191. And the matters that I gave you before, nothing has been followed through on my behalf. Nothing. And I don't care about anybody rolling their eyes at me. We're not in high school. We're supposed to be professionals. And I don't have to be white.
Thank you, Ms. Pinkey.
You see it on the paper.
Is there anyone else who came in late who would like to speak? Okay, I guess that's it for public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Anaskevich. Now we will begin our committee, our subcommittee report outs, beginning with our auditor, Mr. Fennell, and his report.
Thank you. I want to begin first with our current project.
Mr. Fennell, you have printouts?
Unfortunately, I don't, because I've made some changes. I'll explain. It's going to be a change in the format on the reporting and how I do that, so I will explain that. And I can, since you brought that up, I can send out an amended report with the changes if anyone wants. I can just send that to the email blast that we use, okay? All right. So regarding our case management development and database system, the RFP went live last evening, and it'll be open for, I think, 3 weeks. RFPs and the information has been sent out to, I believe, 4 specific vendors, but it's open to the public. So we're moving forward with that project. We have a timeline of hopefully having a vendor in place by mid to the end of July, and getting that process started by the 1st of August at the latest, pending no other hiccups. We've had our first round of interviews for our Executive Assistant 1 position that we need to fill. We have our second round tomorrow evening. That'll include members of the HR committee. So we're moving forward with that for our candidates, and we are preparing the HR paperwork and notice for the data analysts. So we're moving forward with that. Over the last 30 days or so, we've Deputy Auditor Myers and I have attended various trainings. I'll let her speak to training conference that she attended a couple of weeks ago, but we've attended webinars as well as in-person trainings, still building our knowledge base, honing our skills, and staying abreast of current trends. So, Ms. Myers, if you want to go ahead and speak to your training right now.
Sure. So I had the privilege of attending a constitutional policing conference in Cocoa Beach, Florida, May 6th through the 8th. And the conference was really informative. There was a lot of anticipation on the AI workshops because, as we all know, AI is impacting all industries, but particularly law enforcement. So that was there were quite a few workshops on that. The consent decree that we all should be aware of, that President Trump has issued an executive order on. There was a really good discussion about that and what that means moving forward in policing, and particularly as it relates to oversight. There was one workshop that I thought was really informative. It was facilitated by Marietta Police Department. They have a Brazilian, I can never say this word, jiu-jitsu. Yeah, so they are trained, their officers are trained in that, and they talked about how it builds their confidence, because what they began to recognize is that a lot of use of force is used because often officers aren't really confident, and quite frankly don't really know how to fight, so they're more apt to resort to other means and mechanisms to gain control. So he shared a lot of stats. I'll share some with you. They found that there was a 23% reduction in their taser deployments after they implemented this practice amongst their officers. And also there was like a 48% reduction in officer injury. So, and there's countless other stats that I won't really go into, but it sounded very positive. So I thought that was a really good takeaway. So there were a lot of different programs that people were there kind of, showcasing. But overall, it was a really good conference, so.
I have a question for Keisha. Regarding the consent decree, was there anything in particular that stood out for you that just kind of stayed on your mind about that?
So actually at the conference, majority of the participants were attorneys, oddly enough. So there was a lot of discussion about it, but the consensus seemed to be that those consent decrees that are already kind of enacted or have been implemented, they don't think legally a lot can be done with those, but in terms of any new consent decrees, that's where there will be, an about face regarding those. But yeah, there seemed to be kind of like a understanding like, well, I mean, if it's already something that's a binding contract, if you will, the legalities around that and trying to usurp that, they're not sure if the president necessarily has that level of, that's illegal. Constitutionally, he can do that. So there was a
But
lot
they
of
don't
discussion.
have any idea what's coming down the pipe from this guy.
Meaning President Trump? Perhaps.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, board? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'll move into some reports that we discussed during the governance meeting. But before I do that, a couple of weeks ago, President Kemp, Boyd, myself, Tony Ingram, Deputy Public Safety Strategist Tony Ingram, Chief Harding, and the President of the FOP, Brian Lucy, all met. And the chief and I had been meeting on a regular basis for some time, but it had fallen off over the last few months for various reasons. But President Boyd felt that now was the time to bring everyone back together and resume those meetings in a way to have that line of communication open between all parties, and also provide understanding from both sides. So during the meeting, obviously, we discussed various topics, and I found that meeting to be very helpful, very insightful. We're going to continue to have these meetings, at least for the near future, pretty regular, and then we'll decide if it's a monthly thing or how it works. But for right now, we're going to continue because we're going to enter into this use of force review. We've got some other things that will be coming up, and I've made numerous recommendations over the past year and a few months that we need to address, not just the single recommendations to individual instances and individual incidents, use of force incidents, but also recurring themes that I've been able to identify, and these recommendations keep coming up. So as part of that conversation, when I spoke with the chief and spoke with Mr. Lucy, I believe is he Sergeant Lucy? Sergeant Lucy, spoke with them and said that with respect to my reports, I will be, and you also understand that when I make recommendations, the administration has to respond to those within 45 days. Well, on the reoccurring themes or on recommendations that are not case-specific or incident-specific, say to a single officer, but it's more of a reoccurring theme that we identify, I will, and it has nothing to do necessarily with the use of force, I will be classifying those reviews, if I agree with the findings, as concur. I will still have the recommendations in the report, but I will not submit that report to the administration for the 45-day review. Instead, I will place those recommendations that are part of a recurring theme in a single report, and that report may be a quarterly report or a semi-annual report, but during our meetings with the chief and with the union and with the administration, those subjects will come up so that we can work to look at the systemic issues with those issues. Now, if it is a report where, say, I concur with the use of force in the incident, but say I find an unaddressed violation or I find some other incident within my review, then I will issue those recommendations to the administration for the immediate 45-day review. If it's something specific to that officer, if it's an oversight of a violation or a missed violation, I will present it there. And then, of course, if I do not concur at all, it'll go through the same process. So you'll see something different in how I report out. The numbers may change a little, but just understand that the recommendations are still going to be documented and they're still going to be addressed, but it's not going to be addressed on an incident-by-incident basis if it's a reoccurring issue. The case number will be attributed to it in the, say, in the quarterly or semi-annual report of the recommendations, but the individual weekly or monthly reports will not go out the way I've been doing it before. And hopefully, we can help identify the systemic issues a lot quicker. We can formulate a solution or a response from the administration that addresses it systemically as opposed to individually, and the administration can have more time to spend on those issues that are the most egregious that happen like on a single incident. So I wanted to explain that before I read these reports, because as we vote on each one, I'll say this is one that's we need to vote on and this is one we don't, even if I have the recommendations, because those recommendations will go in a separate document. So hopefully that makes sense.
So that it's, for efficiency's sake, it's be more efficient, it sounds like.
Part of it, yes, but I believe overall, when we bring all of the recommendations together, I can say, okay, we've had 10 or 12 cases in the last quarter that all had a use of force issue with strikes to the head or body cam violations or something like that. It's not going to be something that's specifically related to the use of force, but more of an underlying or additional issue that I've identified.
I just wanted to say I'm glad that Sergeant Lucy is joining the conversations. That's a great step forward. And I also like what you just said, that the plan that you just laid out, because to me, sort of isolating the systemic issues, the reoccurring issues, will allow you all to structure your conversations when you come together and be more specific and hopefully, identify some common ground for moving forward and maybe working on those systemic issues without having all the other specific cases that you're trying to talk about as well. So good, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds more efficient to me.
Okay. Well, and having said that, I don't have any, I have reports to report out on, but I don't have any that will require a board vote tonight to send a memo to the council and to the mayor. So I will begin, if it's okay. All right. Case number 2025-000-28142. This is an incident that occurred 3:43 in the morning on March 15th of this year, and officers responded to a location on a report of a fight with an injury. The subject that was involved as the aggressor is an 18-year-old nonverbal autistic individual with a documented history of aggressive behavior, and he was attacking his caretakers. As the officers arrived at the location, they observed two female caretakers physically restraining this young man, and who was combative and had been violent with them that evening. The officers assumed control of the young man, but during their attempt to detain this young man, He kicked an officer in the face and continued to resist. The officers utilized grappling and body weight techniques to subdue him and eventually got him in handcuffs. Once in handcuffs, he continued to physically resist and began to move about, which could have and posed a risk to himself and to others. So the officers deployed the wrap restraint device and successfully got him secured in the wrap. He was transported to hospital under a pink slip. They did not file any charges against him. So in reviewing this use of force, I looked at a few things. One, obviously, he was in a mental health crisis. He was having a violent crisis. It's 3:43 in the morning. Wasn't a good setting. So the officers, even though he's having a mental health crisis, he was physically. They viewed him physically attacking the caretakers, so they had to use some level of force. It was an immediate threat, and so some force was necessary, and the officers did not use any more force than was necessary to get him under control. Found that the officers used non-lethal force, grappling, body weight, and a restraint device. They called for EMS as soon as he was under control. They communicated with him as best they could under the circumstances, and they only used a wrap device when they could not, even in handcuffs, contain him. So I didn't find any issues with their application of force. And so APD investigation showed that the actions were objectively reasonable. I concur with that. But again, on overarching recommendations that I found a theme is with the wrap device to implement more training, provide annual refreshers. There's policy enhancement to clarify procedures for prone positioning while in the wrap system, especially to reduce the risk of asphyxiation. There is no real protocol for that, for prone positioning, specifically in the wrap device. And then also create and develop, in cooperation with National Autism Association, protocols for autistic individuals so that our officers have a better understanding of sensory overload and crisis episodes and how to respond to those situations. And then during our governance meeting, when I was explaining this, our board member, Ms. Erica Hawkins here, came up with an excellent recommendation that I have included as well, which is to have the officers do some more community policing and engagement and have the officers that work in that area visit that facility when the young man's not in crisis so that he can begin to at least be more accustomed and more used to officers in uniform. It's not gonna necessarily prevent if he's already in crisis, but when they see him, they may be able to develop a relationship of some sort so that he's more familiar with an officer in uniform, their equipment, what it looks like, what it sounds like, and again, it will not be another big shock to him while he's in crisis. And then, of course, add to the CIT training or mental health crisis training in general and expand on that to recognize autism spectrum behaviors, alternatives to physical restraint, and communication methods for nonverbal individuals. So any questions?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. One, that's an excellent review. Two, I think your recommendations are spot on. Being a mental health professional myself, you can never get enough training on specific mental health disorders, specifically autism, because people who are on the autism spectrum display different types and different variations of behavior. And when that behavior calls for a law enforcement to show up, it can, if they don't understand what they're dealing with, it could become very, very escalated and very problematic. And I just want to commend you on your recommendations for how everything, it sounds like everything went perfectly, as perfectly as it could go. But then the recommendations that they also continue training on the autism spectrum and there are other types of mental health disorders that could come out that people aren't used to dealing with on a regular basis. You know, an adult who has autism, I'm assuming he was an adult.
18 years old.
Yeah, so that, and that has a different dynamic to it as well. So I just want, in the recommendation about the RAP, I think that's an incredible recommendation as well, because you don't want, the purpose of the RAP is for everyone's safety, for the citizens' safety, for the police safety, but it doesn't ever hurt to get extra training and learn how that safety can be, you know, adhered to from beginning to end, because you don't want a mistake to happen when the whole point was to keep them safe. So I think your recommendations are spot on, and I think that that's an excellent report, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So on to the next one. Oh, any other questions? I'm sorry. Okay, on to the next one. Case number 2025-0003636. This was a domestic violence call. It involved a subject who had threatened her mother with a knife. She had barricaded herself in her room with her dog when the officers arrived. The officers spent over 20 minutes talking and trying to de-escalate the situation by talking to the young lady, trying to get her to open the door and come on out without the knife. She had made comments that she was going to harm herself, and so the officers made a decision after about with more than 20 minutes of talking with her that they felt like it was escalating. They forced their way into the room, were able to disarm her by using joint manipulation and body weight, and later they had to also use the RAP device because she continued, once she was in handcuffs, trying to harm herself. I think documented it was well over 23 minutes. So they did do what we asked the officers to do with de-escalation efforts and trying to use time and distance to talk with her. They did not use any punches, did not use any less lethal weapons. It was all joint manipulation, controlling her hands and arms, and even though she was kicking the officers and pulling away and trying to use her body weight to cause the officers to fall. I concur with the finding of objectively reasonable by APD, and the recommendation again is to create a policy review on the RAP use as part of use of force review, but right now there is no policy really in place on the RAP use, and there's no real documentation other than when it's documented in the use of force, but it's not specified with its own category. So developing that policy recommendation and really following the usage of the RAP so that we can get a better understanding is the recommendation. Any questions? Okay. The next is 2025-000-20065. This is an incident that happened February 23rd of this year. It involved a reserve officer who was working at the bus terminal. Subject was loitering in the transit center and was told to leave after becoming confrontational with some of the employees there. The reserve officer and a transit officer engaged with the subject and were walking the subject off of the property. The subject began to resist their verbal directions as he got closer and closer to the end of the property. He then entered a restricted bus lane, and he punched an officer on the head. He punched a reserve officer on the head. The two officers took the subject to the ground, gained control of him rather quickly, and were able to put on the handcuffs without any further incident. He did have a red mark on his face when they were all on the ground, but he had no significant injury. He was charged with disorderly conduct and arrested. So, and other charges and arrested. So I had absolutely no issue with the use of force. APD did not have an issue with the use of force. In fact, the officers used de-escalation techniques very well. They were calmly talking to him, and even though he was combative and resistive to leaving the premises, they took the time necessary to walk him off of the property and almost got him off the property when he turned around and punched the officer in the face. The officers were acting very professional even after being physically assaulted. So I had no issue with that. There is an issue that came after the fact that was addressed by a supervising officer, and that is that once the arrest was made, a sergeant who was not involved in the incident responded to the scene. And once that sergeant learned that the subject had punched the officer in the head, the sergeant made a comment of he made a comment on why they didn't put the suspect in the hospital. And that comment was brought to the attention of Captain Wren, who contacted the sergeant and asked the sergeant to prepare a memo to explain that comment and what he meant by it. And so the sergeant stated that he has known the reserve officer for many years, and while he is an older officer, he is by no means a frail man. If you have ever shaken hands with him, you would know he has a large hand and very strong grip. I was truly surprised that the reserve officer didn't punch the suspect back, which surely would have done some damage, especially if it would have been a blow to the head. So the sergeant was, and Captain Wren had a conversation. I'll say it that way. They had a conversation, and Captain Wren documented the conversation, and he spoke with the sergeant about the comment and how, as a supervisor, his words carry significant weight and influence. So I wanted to raise that because, as you know, I've pushed and pushed and pushed about punches to the head. And if a supervisor expresses those feelings, then the subordinates feel that it's okay to do so in any situation. And that is something that, first, I'm glad, and I want to applaud Captain Wren for identifying the seriousness of that comment and the impact as a supervisor it would have on subordinates, and then drawing attention to it and documenting that and then addressing it. So I wanted to pull that out to bring to the board today. So I have no other comments on it. Any comments? Okay. The next one is 2025-000-20175. This is an incident that happened February 23rd of this year. It's a traffic crash, a traffic accident, and officers were responding to. And while responding and addressing the traffic accident, another subject drove through the red light and passed the crash scene at a high rate of speed. He then exited his vehicle and attempted to approach the crash scene. Officers that were trying to direct traffic stopped him or attempted to stop him, but he pushed past them, ignored their commands, and physically brushed past the officers on 2 separate occasions. still headed toward the crash scene. So the officers performed a physical takedown and placed this gentleman under arrest. There was no injuries. What they later learned was, well, first, when the original crash occurred, there was also a report of some kind of altercation, a physical fight between the two drivers. So they calmed that situation down and were investigating the accident. Well, the subject that pulled up was the brother of one of the drivers, and he also learned that there was a fight there, and he responded to the scene. They also learned in talking to the subject that was placed under arrest was that he had recently had a death in his family, and his emotions were heightened because of that. Nonetheless, he was arrested for, I think he was arrested for resisting arrest and misconduct at an emergency. Had no issue, again, with the finding of objectively reasonable. The officers attempted de-escalation verbally multiple times. They tried to do containment by keeping him back. He pushed past them, physically pushed past them, so had no problem with the use of force. It was also, high traffic location, a crash scene, so it was very important that they not let him enter into the scene and restart the altercation either. So the recommendation that will be going on the list is one, and this is more of a training opportunity where the officers and supervisors could benefit from additional scenario-based de-escalation training, which focuses on emotionally charged civilian responses at emergency scenes. I've seen other situations where family members or people outside of an incident scene have responded emotionally and did not listen to the officers and subsequently were placed under arrest, and then a use of force report was generated out of that. So I think a specific training to maybe recognize that this is also emotionally charged, and while arrest is legal, arrest technically is a violation. It's also another consideration that maybe the officers can really use additional de-escalation time and distance and patience in that situation to as opposed to arrest. And then also community engagement recommendation to where maybe this is on our part, we do more public education campaign on the importance of not disregarding an officer at a crime scene just because that's your brother or your mother that's involved. Even though it's emotional, it's still a crime scene. So how we formulate that, we can discuss later, but that's a recommendation. Any questions?
I was just going to say, I was just thinking about what might be done, and possibly it just depends on the situation of having an officer designated to deal with family members, take them aside, explain what's going on, try to calm them down, assuage some of their fears, so that it doesn't escalate to, like you said, sometimes, the family members or loved ones or whoever comes along ends up getting arrested as well, so.
It's a good idea.
I agree with Ms. Jones, because from what you described, the guy pulled up, he jumps out and starts running towards the crime scene. That alone tells any normal-minded person that they obviously know someone involved in that crash, and their emotions are high and they're worried or whatever. So,
well, they had broken up an altercation as well, so, and gotten both parties calmed down, so they didn't.
Previously, before the accident?
Before this gentleman pulled up.
Oh,
So
I see.
that was another factor that played into this.
Gotcha. So they didn't really know, they couldn't really discern which part this guy was involved in.
And they didn't know if he was going to restart the fight.
Exactly. Okay, well, that makes sense. Well, it sounds like they handled it perfectly, as well as they could.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir.
Ms. Fennell, what was the recommendation that you made? I know you made one from a community perspective. What was the other one that you made?
Is for training, specifically, I mean, the officers, the department already does de-escalation training, various types of de-escalation training, but maybe developing a scenario or discussing really when you're dealing with emotionally charged individuals at a crime scene. You know, I think back to the shooting, the big shooting last summer, and there were numerous people that were arrested that weren't involved in the shooting that were very upset because the crime scene was so large. They wanted to go into the crime scene. You know, officers were outnumbered, and so instead of listening to the officers were, you know, using OC spray to get them back, and some people were actually being handcuffed. But all of those generated a use of force incident that could have been avoided, you know, if both sides maybe took some time to understand, okay, I understand you're excited, upset, concerned, want to know, you know, if your loved one's shot, but let me find out for you, and if you stay here, I'll find out, and vice versa. Yeah. So I think that kind of training would be helpful.
Yeah. Is there, I don't know, and maybe Deputy Chief, you can help me with this, but, you know, obviously there's the broadness, I think, of like a use of force training. I think in terms of social services and different, you know, mental health categories, that we have many mental health board members here, but I always think about, you know, there's mental health, the broad scope of it, right? But then there's, if you will, specialties or individual things, right? That are, you know, the term is always used evidence-based. And so I don't know if there is like a catalog when you start to look at use of force, but are there, I guess to the point that you're making, if I pull up the content, you know, of use of force, kind of like a beginning, does it break itself down in that way? Like use of force one-on-one, use of force in a group, use of force in a, like, I'm just asking just out of ignorance. Yeah, please.
So that's a great question. Appreciate the question. It doesn't break it down in that fine nuance in that way. You know, it's really incident specific, and also certainly case by case, because every one is different. But you try to look at and take into consideration the totality of what you're presented with, really balanced with the need to secure the scene and or to make sure folks are safe. That incident that you guys outlined would be a very challenging call for any officer of any tenure. Because again, to your point, emotions were high and things of that nature. I imagine their primary concern would have been around safety and security and so forth. You know, the officers have regular discussion, specifically in roll calls on a regular basis, as well as in in-service settings where applicable and where possible, you do want to extend grace. And we do have those level of conversations with the officers really across the division. Can't speak to that one specific as to why it came out that way, but certainly some of those dynamics are included in training scenarios. Scenario-based trainings is where that shows up best, and just giving officers something else to consider when making those decisions. Certainly in that case too, and I'll say last that they typically will run that by a police supervisor. The hope is that it's, you know, objective and it was necessary. But we welcome opportunities to evaluate whether there was a better approach. I'm not saying there was a better approach to this one, but in general, we seek the best outcomes for that. And if I could circle just for a moment back to 2 incidents prior, I think it was 2, Ms. Aniskevich or Mr. Fennell highlighted an incident with an autistic individual. And so we do have yearly training around, again, we could certainly use more, and the more training, the better we are, and the better we serve the community to that extent. but we do receive training around autism, and/or we have a process where we can even specifically, at the parent's request, enter some information into the computer that certainly wouldn't violate any privacy rights or things of that nature. But say if it's a vulnerable child, whether mental health or autism, and so that would flag either police or fire response to know that, hey, you have this dynamic at this house. So those are some of the steps that we've taken over the recent years. And we also are in current conversation about enhancing our autism responses through some additional training that we're meeting with folks in that space in the coming weeks.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief. Mr. Fennell, in no way, so please hear this and wish the heart I'll bring it. In no way am I trying to add work to anyone. But I think sometimes, yeah, like if there was any type of training similar to one that Deputy Chief just described that is kind of specific, right? As we think about use of force as a whole, but then in this situation, like, is there, like, I love what Ms. Meyer said before about, oh man, she went to a training and they're training their officers in jujitsu. Like, you know, I'm prompted like, man, what made them think, if you will, kind of outside the box with that? And so, I don't know. Your recommendation triggered me to start thinking like, how does these things break down? So when we ask for training, more training in something, is there anything out there that's being offered, and where do we kind of find that at? Does that make sense? You know, so that way we're giving something, because it's one thing for somebody to tell me, oh man, you know, you need to lose weight, right? But tell me the direction to the gym. Not that anybody's ever told me that, but I'm just, I'm using it as an example.
And I think those conversations those kind of conversations are going to come out of when we met the other day and talked about taking these type of recommendations and putting them in a separate box and then working from that too. And this is a conversation Chief Harding and I had many months ago, that particularly on like general things, talk about use of force. Make the recommendation broader so that when we have the conversation, because it's going to be more that comes into than just the single incident thing. So when we're talking about training and de-escalation, we can put in those scenarios of heightened emotions at a crime scene, autistic, nonverbal individuals, whatever. But the whole thing is to create a training block that will cover those bases. But you can't cover it all.
Yeah.
But if we're seeing something, then we probably need to figure out a way to find the training or create a training block to address it. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Fennell. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, I just have a overall blanket comment based on what you've given us, what you, Mr. Chairman, have mentioned about the training and Deputy Chief. I think it's important too for everyone to remember that police work is not, and I'm speaking from experience, having worked for Akron Police for a long time, it's not an exact science. 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4. Those are exact sciences. It always has been, it always will be. And I can't tell you how many times we had calls come in and it was dispatched that this one situation was going on, but by the time the police got there, it was a whole different situation had evolved. And they had to deal with it based on not what they were told anymore, but what they are seeing once they get there. So I just think it's important for everyone to remember that you know, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. And a lot of times when people call in, they don't know what they should be describing as to what's going on, too. So I just think it's important for everybody to remember that as well.
Okay, thank you. I've just got a couple more to go through. The next one is 2025-000-21431. This is a disturbance call, happened February 26th of this year. police responded to a location regarding an intoxicated male. Upon their arrival, they saw the male struggling with a security officer that was working at the location. As they rushed toward the place where they were struggling, the security guard let the officers know that the person was trying to take his gun. So the person ran, the officers gave chase, more officers arrived. Ultimately, they were told that the officer may be armed. As they were chasing him, it was snow out, it was slick and nasty out. The officers were slipping, and a couple officers injured themselves. While running, they were giving him verbal commands and telling him to stop and show his hands. They eventually caught him after an officer deployed his taser twice. The first time it was ineffective. Officers then were able to engage in a physical confrontation with this person, which included punches to the head and to the abdomen. They were eventually able to subdue him and get him in handcuffs, and ultimately they had to place him in a wrap device. A firearm was not recovered. They learned that the security officer did not lose his firearm, but the person was trying to take it from him. So, again, I didn't have an issue with the level of force in this instance. It was late at night. When they finally caught up with this person, they were all in near a tree line, so they were all up in trees and on the ground. And he wouldn't show his hands. And at that time, they did believe that he was still armed. So the punches that he received, I found those to be reasonable because he was fighting back as well and kicking. And so I had no issue with those in that context. The wrap restraint, didn't have an issue with that because even after he was handcuffed, he was still very combative. He attempted to try to crawl away, and he was resisting the officers as they were trying to search him to see if he had the weapon, had a gun on him. There were some concerns about officer safety and tactical coordination because as the officers were chasing him, the communication and the coordination between these multiple officers was very confused, and which caused some officers to get injured. However, when they finally did get him contained and on the ground, they appeared mostly organized, but they're more reactive rather than de-escalative type tactics. So although the punches, I said, I don't have a problem with them, there seemed to be more punches than really trying to lock down on his arm. But I'm not going to critique that. It was a pretty high-stress situation. So my recommendation, again, falls in line with the head strikes, the punches to the head. So that's a general overview for the use of force. And it's going to be incorporated into the use of force policy review. So any questions? No. Okay. 2025-000-27192. This was an incident happened March 13th. An officer observed a vehicle run a red light and nearly caused an accident. So the officer initiated a traffic stop. When the officer stopped the vehicle, the driver exited the vehicle, exhibited erratic behavior, suggesting a possible mental health issue. The person refused to get back in the car, ran into traffic, ran towards bystanders, making incoherent statements, believed that the officer, stated that the officer was her brother, and also stated that bystanders had guns. So this person ran towards oncoming traffic, and the officer had to perform a takedown to stop her from entering the traffic and get her out of the middle of the street. She was placed in handcuffs and transported to the hospital under a mental health pink slip situation. Now, I had no problem with the takedown. It was reasonable and proportionate to what was going on. However, in this situation, the supervisor noted two things. One, that the officer missed an opportunity to de-escalate before the situation escalated, and that the officer used profane language in direct violation of APD Rule 200.01. My recommendation, which will go into the ongoing discussion, is development of an early intervention system, because this officer had a prior counseling for the same incident, similar incident, and similar behavior of profane language usage. And so their disciplinary action was elevated beyond a counseling, and that there needs to be some enhanced monitoring for repeat low-level conduct violations, not necessarily for this officer, but for any officer. So, any questions? No? Okay, last two are situations where, once I explain them, you'll see where officers used, in my opinion, did everything the way we'd like for them to do them. And in one situation, it was a very tense situation that could have easily gone the other way. And so on January 27th of this year, the SWAT team responded to a barricaded suspect who had strangled and assaulted his wife, resulting in severe injuries, had multiple felony warrants, was armed with a weapon, had made statements indicating suicidal ideation, and a few weeks before had been engaged in yet another SWAT standoff. Several hours of negotiations occurred. This incident happened in the middle of the night and was not resolved until well past sunrise. So officers were out all night trying to negotiate with this subject to come out of the house. They deployed chemical agents into the home, and at one point, the subject ran out the front door towards the officers with the firearm in his hand. Now, the firearm was down by his side. He had not pointed it at anyone, didn't have it raised at the officers. So the initial SWAT operator that was closest to him physically engaged this person on the side of the house, and a struggle ensued. Other SWAT operators joined in to try to disarm the person. So it was multiple officers trying to get the hand with the gun. The person indicated that he was going to shoot himself, shoot an officer, but he kept the gun underneath him and was kind of pointing it at the officers, but he didn't have it fully extended. He was laying down on it. So the officers used multiple levels of force to include strikes, grappling, and takedowns to subdue him. And after several strikes to both the head, face, and body, as well as the grappling, the officers, an officer was able to grab his hand that held the gun and rip the gun from his hand. And they were able to ultimately get him placed in handcuffs. So there was an immediate threat, obviously, that he exited the residence with a loaded firearm. He had stated his intent to have officers kill him and attempted to maintain control of the gun even during the struggle. So definitely posed a clear imminent threat to the officers' lives. He was actively resisting, And while there were numerous strikes to his head and ribs, the proportionality and reasonableness of those actions was appropriate in this situation. And while these tactics were forceful, they avoided the use of lethal force. And there was one officer standing by at the ready in case he brought that firearm up or used it to use lethal force. The officers upheld the duty to preserve life, and they used the force techniques that avoided deadly force, even though in this situation, deadly force may have been justified. And I believe the reason, I can't interview these officers, but I believe the reason they didn't shoot him as he exited the house was because the gun was down by his side and not raised. We're talking about SWAT operators who are highly trained and highly disciplined. So I think their decision to subdue him rather than shoot him saved his life. So I wanted to point that out. I do have some recommendations, however, and I'm not sure if this has been, I did look at the body-worn camera policy, but I'm not sure if this has been amended, but I'm making the recommendation anyway that it equips SWAT personnel with body-worn cameras, because after the SWAT operators arrived on the scene, there was no more video, body-worn video of up close. It was, or their actions, because the responding police officers, regular officers, had been moved back to a perimeter position. Again, the reinforced training on targeted head strikes. And again, in this situation, they were justified, but still have that training on the risk and when you should or when you should be allowed to use such force. I had update policy language to clearly define force options in armed subject encounters. So again, to clarify permissible tactics when facing armed suicidal individuals who are not yet actively threatening others but may become threats. And so in this instance, it evolved so quickly, I don't even think, that the officers reacted and did a great job, but it was a very dynamic situation, a very quickly evolving situation. And then also for the SWAT personnel and for officers in general, develop a post-incident wellness protocols for officers involved in potentially lethal encounters. You have that for officers that are involved in lethal encounters, but when it's a potential lethal encounter, the officers go through the same level of stress and same level of mental injury, so to speak, as if they had pulled the trigger, because it was just a second away. It would have been different. So just want to make sure that their mental health support is provided to officers exposed to near deadly events. Any questions?
Just a quick comment. I appreciate that summary. What may not be highlighted there or may be highlighted there, but just want to remind the board here that one of the tools for a situation like that, barricaded suspects, especially armed and or threatening, a few years ago, you may know we acquired what we're describing as a community rescue vehicle, and that is proven paid for itself over and over in terms of the number of lives that it saved, including its role in that incident that night.
It was there, yes.
And it was a ancillary point, but it's unique though, because prior to the subject coming out with his gun to the side and then falling on it and not being able to access it, what caused him to go to the ground is that the officers breached the door with the device attached to that community rescue vehicle. And so the time of day was still kind of dark, not very well lit, and the subject came out of the door and, unbeknownst to him, ran into that, essentially a ram, and that knocked him to the ground, to the gun. And we wondered, like, hey, what might that have been for everyone involved, the officers, the citizens, and so forth. So just I mention that for the purpose of make you aware or to remind you that there are certain unique circumstances where that is an appropriate tool and a resource. We've used it a good half dozen times over the last, say, year and a half. And in that incident, you can see its value. I just wanted to mention that, but I appreciate the summary.
Thank you. Yes, I did not mention the vehicle with the ramp, the battering ram on the front. And that vehicle, if I understand correctly, was placed or blocking the door, and they had moved it back so they could administer some more chemical munitions, and that's when the person took the opportunity to try to get out. But it wasn't, it wasn't big enough. It wasn't a big enough space, and like Deputy Chief said, he didn't see it, and that helped make their decision to go hands-on.
I had a comment. That's a heck of a story. And I just want to say that that sounds like really, really good and really thoughtful police work by the SWAT team. It's just, it's just amazing to have to, I'm sure their adrenaline was high everywhere, and they had to deal with their own feelings of possible fear of getting shot, but it seems like through it all, they put a lot of thought into how they were going to deal with this situation where everybody could come out alive. And it is interesting to me, the difference between a situation like this where the guy actually did come out with a gun, and no one was hurt, no one was shot, not him, not the perpetrator, not the police. And I guess maybe, Deputy Chief, you can answer this question. Is there just a vast difference, though, between how SWAT officers are trained and how line staff police officers are trained? Because something in me tells me if this had just been line staff police officer, it may not have turned out this well.
So that's a good question. I appreciate the question. I would say there are unique differences in terms of the types of regular, rigorous, ongoing training that members of the SWAT team received, and understandably so. But we have vast levels of tenure or seniority on the SWAT team. We have some officers on the SWAT team with a few years up to 20 or more years. The core, you hope, if done correctly, is the same. So the baseline training, state level, and the training we receive in-house does adequately prepare you for a situation like that. But the dynamics are so unique that it does require that level of skill among, the tactics and the approach and, the equipment and things of that nature. And you saw that play out for that reason. I wouldn't say that the success of that was strictly limited to, the years on and that type of thing versus just the skills that they deployed that night. The de-escalation on the front end, as you mentioned, it was multiple hours, so there's fatigue and other factors to consider, but I just think the totality of the approach led to that successful outcome. We're striving to, again, strengthen how we equip the officers daily, whether it be from the academy, once they hit the street, through FTO, and so forth. But your point is noted, but I think that incident that incident we just described, and also being that individual second-like incident in terms of a standoff, was extremely unique.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and the last one is it's a case that I completely concurred with no recommendations, but I thought it was important to bring out because of the work that the officers did. And in this incident is 2025-00026556. And once again, officers found themselves reporting to a disturbance that involved an individual that was under the influence and also exhibiting erratic behavior. It's a 26-year-old male. The erratic behavior was included crawling on the ground, growling, high-fiving an imaginary crowd, and failing to respond to commands. And the officers quickly realized that he was either under the influence of a narcotic drug of some sort, mental health crisis, or a combination of both. So They made numerous attempts to gain voluntary compliance for this individual to go with EMS for a mental health evaluation. They utilized rapport building techniques through conversation, offered him a beverage to drink, and he continued to display resistance by not getting into the EMS transportation, verbally stated that he would not enter the ambulance, and eventually attempted to walk away. So after a period of time, the officers initiated physical tactics to prevent him from fleeing, and were able to get him secured by using a takedown technique and using body weight and arm control techniques. He was ultimately handcuffed and taken to Akron General Medical Center under a mental health pink slip statute. I just wanted to highlight that he was not injured. They did take the time to try to convince him to go on his own, but when that did not work and it looked like he was about to do something that would cause him harm, they took the necessary steps to get him under control and get him the treatment he needed. That concludes my report.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd just like to say that the auditor and deputy auditor are just doing prodigious work at this point. There were a total of 22 cases that were reported on at the review committee, and that's a lot of work. And as you're seeing, I mean, you know, reports of the highest quality, and that very much includes the ones that Mr. Fennell didn't discuss tonight. I think it's worth saying that they've got their rhythm at this point, and just doing, as far as I'm concerned, you know, seeing it in more detail, just wonderful work, and I think that needs to be said.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. I concur. Thank you, Mr. Fennell. Thank you, Ms. Myers, just for the continuous, I think, excellent work that you're doing. Any other comments or questions from?
I have one. I agree totally. Just excellent reviews, excellent work. But I also want to say something that I'm feeling based on these reports and your recommendations. It sounds to me that the police department as a whole are starting to evolve in a more positive direction in how they're dealing with these super important issues with citizens out here on the street. There's a lot going on out here, apparently. You know, people, you know, they might be erratic behavior. You don't know why their behavior is erratic, but it sounds to me like they're also evolving in how they're dealing with these issues. They're not having knee-jerk reactions to them based on this report tonight, these reports tonight anyway. And not only that, how the supervisors are responding to those that they did have to reprimand. And I think that's a positive thing, and I hope it continues, and it makes me feel good. Those reports and how the outcomes of all of them based on your recommendations, how the supervisors handled those who needed to be the officers who needed to be handled, it just makes me feel it's a refreshing feeling for me this evening.
Well, thank you both, all of you, for the comments and the kind words. I do want to add, though, to Ms. Anashevitz, your comment. Until tonight, really, I have not reported on the reviews where I concur with the actions. And you know, my thinking at that time was I concur with it, I will move on. Many of those reviews that I've looked at, and it's almost 300, so about over 90% of those reviews that I've looked at where I concur wholeheartedly with the actions of the officers, many of those involve a supervisor that has identified a violation and addressed it. They also involve, like in the last one that I spoke about, where officers have done everything right. So I want to begin bringing those to the board's attention, as well as the incidents where where I don't agree because I think if all I'll report on is the incidents where I don't agree, then it sends a message that APD is just doing everything wrong, when actually the numbers that we've looked at show that where I totally disagree with them are a very small percentage, less than 2% of the total that I've looked at. And I do think we need to focus on that 2%, because those are serious incidents where we do need to have those conversations and we need to call it out when we see it. But also at the same time, if there are incidents where the officers are faced with some very difficult and challenging situations, and at the end of the day, yes, they use force, they use it appropriately. We've authorized them and given them the authority to use force, and they follow the rules and do it. I think that needs to be noted as well.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Echoing that a little bit, I believe the chief, in his report within the last several weeks, I want to say 27%. Deputy Chief could correct me, but I think there's been a 27% reduction in use of force incidents over probably the year, whatever period the chief was talking about. You can't. That's correlation. It's not causation, but it's an interesting correlation to the auditors coming aboard. And I believe there's also some anecdotal indications, some of it maybe not intended to be this, that the increased awareness of oversight is perhaps influencing behavior.
Well said. Well said. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Fennell, or even Ms. Myers, for that matter?
That concludes the auditor's report.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to Mr. Gippen and our governance report out subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were all geared up to talk about, well, what do we do next about pushing ahead use of force review? And then the auditor had learned that morning, a week ago, of what was intended, and of course reported to us about it, which we were, dare say, ecstatic, to hear. And I don't know whether, Mr. Fennell, you want to add anything to what's been in the media and said, what Ms. Holden said, but I thought I'd ask if you wanted to add anything to it about our intended role and so on.
Well, other than, I'm glad we're moving forward with this process, and one of the reasons why at the beginning of the year, Ms. Jones and Deputy Myers here began the community engagement work along with Ms. Holden and others in the community was so that we would already be prepared and ready with when this happens. And I'm looking forward to how we can engage with the University of Akron, specifically on the community engagement piece, so that it's not only a one-time or a one-season event, but it's an ongoing institutionalized process through the university, to where after the whoever's selected to do the use of force review leaves, we can monitor through our office, and then also through the resources of the university, monitor the implementation and how the recommendations are working within APD and build upon that. So I'm excited about that.
Mr. Chairman, we only slightly had touched in governance about, it was more in the question of where do matters stand with the collective bargaining agreement, because we did not know, that evening a week ago what was going on behind the scenes. I wonder, might I be able to make some, these are personal comments because it wasn't discussed in committee about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did read the fact finder's report today. I'll give a nod to Mr. Brown because it was his publication that incorporated it, a signal. So I was able to read it, and it's very interesting reading. I would suggest that all of us ought to take the time to read it. Of course, that's the next step is coming, because it was, of course, rejected by by council. A couple things stood out for me, though. The administration did negotiate for some managerial changes, not the ones specifically that we had recommended. But I was very gratified to see that the administration had put some very good proposals, on the table. This wasn't really exactly reported this way, so it surprised me, but the fact finder did agree with the administration on some of the recommendations, which is a good thing. Hopefully they survive conciliation. But a couple of the recommendations that were, a couple of the items that I think are worth mentioning. One had to do with some proposed changes by the administration in the staffing of the Detective Bureau, and how essentially it would have largely removed seniority bidding for some of that. And I think that was very good to see, and maybe coincides with what the administration and councils approved, to look at staffing generally in the department. But I think that in terms of this board's longer-term work, particularly with use of force hopefully now going to go forth, the Detective Bureau, it has seemed to me, was something that very much needed examination, how it operates and how might it be improved. It's a little bit under the radar, but it's been, at least from what I've been seeing, something that bears attention. And I was therefore very glad to see that the administration seemed to recognize the need for some change there as well. Also worth mentioning that the administration failed to get some changes in how internal disciplinary matters are handled. Basically, that it would have been entirely in OPSA, which might not, and some changes in OPSA, in how it's staffed. Again, very, very glad to see that. It's too bad the fact finder didn't agree, but hopefully that too is something which ultimately can be obtained. And if I might then further personally, Mr. Chairman, the police officer pay, the issue of wages and benefits and so on, that's for the administration and council and to negotiate. But what came through to me was that if the city really wants to see effective changing in policing in Akron, both who's doing it and how they're doing it, there plainly is going to be the need for more money on the table. The city, I'm sure, the administration, offered what it could, but there were, of course, limits to what it could offer. And it seems to me, just as one still board member, as a citizen, that it might make sense to look at going back to the public for another public safety levy, would probably also include fire, but which would be geared towards providing the money that's needed to get the quality officers we need, and also to enable the administration to bargain effectively for some of these managerial changes. Of course, the officers aren't going to agree to give up things without compensation, and that compensation, I think, ought to be made available, and it's only really the voters of Akron that can do that. Thank you for indulging me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gippen. Well said. Any questions or comments for Mr. Gippen and Governance Committee?
I have a question. What changes what do you think needed to be changed with the Detective Bureau?
I think they need to look at, primarily they need to look at who is a detective, and that is the essence. If you look at the fact finder's report, and it's his discussion of, I guess it's a him, the discussion of the Detective Bureau changes the administration wanted. That's really what comes through. And I think those of us who went through the Citizens Academy or are still doing it, if they're hearing the same things we heard, the session concerning the Detective Bureau, I think that becomes very, very clear. And I mean broadly, who is doing it? But the work of the Bureau, a little bit that we've learned about it, could be improved. Even though, sure, I mean the case closure and so on is more or less consistent with national levels, but a lot of reason to think it could and should be done better. And again, that was my main takeaway from the Citizens Academy, frankly, and what I was seeing in the report about what the administration was seeking to do in the collective bargaining agreement.
Right. Any further comments or questions for Mr. Gippin and governance? All right, we'll move on to Ms. Myers and community engagement with other board members who are part of that.
Yes, so on April 26th, we had our second cohort, our accountability circles and policing in the path moving forward. We had about 17 individuals participate, and we were able to engage in the deliberative process, as well as kind of lay out our vision and the purpose of what we're doing. What came of that is we decided that an actionable item or next step would be to identify the key stakeholders that really need to be a part of this process. And we've kind of been doing our homework and compiling a list of those individuals. And what we want are, individuals who aren't, who have not been a part of the process so far. So community leaders, grassroots folks, clergy, additional law enforcement officers. Actually, Lori Natko, she was, Officer Natko was present, as well as Deputy Chief Miller as well. And we had also 2 additional officers. I forget his new role. Is it Officer Murphy? I think he's the new community relations. Is that accurate? Okay. He was also present, and then Officer Orlando, who was also at the previous cohort. So we had a greater law enforcement participation, which we are happy about that. And our next step is to get those key stakeholders who've been identified. Right now, I have about a working list of about 20 individuals, additional individuals. I know, Ms. Leah, you reached out to me today and added another person, and I got your text. So we're at about 20, 21 individuals. So we will plan another time to get together to have our kind of pre-circles, and I'll let Ms. Jones kind of talk about what the identity of those circles and the purpose behind those circles will be.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. And again, I want to add my thanks to all those who are participating at this point. So again, as Ms. Myers mentioned, the session on April 26th was specifically designed to help train people to facilitate these circles that we envision that we're going to be rolling out to the community at some point or another. And so what we wanted to do was, before we roll circles out to the community, was first make sure that we're training the facilitators as well as we can to address the specific issues that will come up. And so one of the things that we decided that we needed to do was, one, have get the key stakeholders, as Ms. Myers mentioned, together, because they're the ones who are going to be tapping into their sphere of influence to get people to come to the circles. And so one of the things that I want to, one of my concerns, or at least one of the things that I think we need to focus on, is as we have these different conversations going throughout our community, as you all are meeting with the mayor and with Sergeant Lucy and others, those conversations, whatever the review, the organization that's going to be doing the use of force review, all of these conversations, at some point or another, we have to align them all. We don't want the community to be coming out, giving their best ideas, their input, and then having it not go anywhere. That's the worst thing that can happen. It's disrespectful to people and their time, and then it gives the message that no matter what you have to say, we're going to do whatever we want to do anyway. And so, as Mr. Fennell had mentioned, our idea is to help to inform the use of force reviews, so that these are what the people think, these are the best ideas. We always say in Project Ujima, all of us are smarter than any of us. And so if we can get everybody's best idea, then we can really, really collectively come up with some strategies to improve use of force and officer community relations, all of that needs to happen. And so we're really excited about that. and we just want to go forward. Another thing that we decided to do was, I guess there had been some plans for the clergy and the police officers to meet, and we decided rather than having yet another group, meeting and generating ideas, to combine that. So we're going to be working with clergy as well as other key stakeholders to get people to the circle, as we say, to work together in a collective kind of way to address the issues that come up.
And if I could add just one more thing, we also recognize that having like a pre-circle with just law enforcement only would also be beneficial to, one, kind of allow them to understand the vision and purpose behind this and create that safety and trust as well.
That's true, because we know that, what has come up is that officers feel a certain kind of way, and obviously they do, they have their own perspective and their own thoughts and concerns about what needs to happen. And before we get into a mixed circle, one of the things that we had thought about was, and would hope to do, is maybe have a circle just for the officers to feel safe, to really talk about the things from their own perspective that concern them, their experiences and that kind of thing, before we then have a mixed circle with all the citizens and stakeholders involved, so.
Any questions or comments for the Community Engagement Subcommittee?
Yes, I have a question and either Ms. Myers or Ms. Jones can answer. I mean, this sounds like an excellent beginning to an excellent community engagement endeavor on your part, and I commend you guys on that. And my question is, are you going to have a way of cataloging all of this information that you're going to get back from all of these people who will be involved? Simply, the reason why I'm asking is because we have talked in the past about amendments to the charter. And I think I have spoken before about how in order to amend the charter, we're going to need input from every segment of this community, from the police, from the community, from the clergy, from everybody involved, private citizens, in order to create state-of-the-art amendments for this charter, and everyone can feel like they were a part of it, everybody. So are you guys planning to catalog some of this information, and if so, how do you plan to do it? I'm talking about the feedback that you're getting from people.
For sure. Yes, excellent question. And one thing that we are very appreciative and excited to have is Miss Leah Holden here and Lene Foster. They take extraordinary notes. They have a process. They have a system, and they're actually teaching us about that. Another part of the cohort that we had was about the process of how to record notes and really capture, because it is an art and a science to it, I would say. And Ms. Leah led that conversation and kind of facilitated that aspect. So to your point, yeah, that is something that is very crucial and important to this process.
Excellent, thank you. Because, yeah, I see this as an excellent beginning to that end, hopefully. It's an excellent beginning for something like that.
And I just wanted to add a little bit of information about what this process we're talking about. I mean, one is the circle process, and if anybody's ever participated in a circle, you kind of know the elements of it, how you basically create the conditions for all voices to be heard and all of that. But the other part of it is called deliberation. And so as people generate ideas, rather than arguing over whose idea is the best idea, we really use a process of deliberation where we look at the ideas, we go through a structured conversation of the pros of an idea. What do I like about this idea? Why do I, support this idea? And then the cons, what bothers me about this idea? What don't I like? And then we talk about trade-offs. So if I were to support this idea, what would I have to give up? What am I willing to give up? What are others willing to give up? What do they have to be willing to give up? So that kind of allows people to really listen very, very carefully, and then ultimately, through this pros and cons and trade-offs analysis, it's almost magically, and I've been doing this for a long time, people really kind of can then come up with some ideas on common ground, okay? Looking at pros and cons and trade-offs, what can we together collectively decide that we want to do with this particular idea or with a particular issue? So, I again encourage all of the board to get involved. This is hopefully the way going forward that our community will address issues of shared concern with a sort of a systematic process that is not devoid of emotion, but looks more at strategy than coming and really just venting with anger and pain.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Any other comments or questions for our Community Engagement Subcommittee? If not, we'll go on to Ms. Richards. Do you have anything for HR?
Just what Anthony has already said, we will be interviewing two prospective assistants tomorrow night, and hopefully we'll be able to bring a recommendation to the board shortly after that.
Awesome. All right. Any other comments, questions for the good of the order?
Just a question for Ms. Richards. Are you contemplating a special meeting then to get that done?
I don't know the urgency that you see about this, if you anticipate a special meeting for approval.
I had not considered that. I still would need some processing with HR, but I did discuss with HR that possibility, but once a decision is made, they'll immediately begin processing. So it may be something where if after tomorrow night, if we have a decision that we want to bring to the board, then we can talk about that.
I have a question. How many prospective candidates do you have? Two. Just two? Okay. And how many people are interviewing?
Ms. Richards, Ms. Hawkins, myself, and there may be someone from HR that sits in and observes. Had Ms. Myers on standby, but I think she'd rather spend time with her son, so.
I just wanted to make sure you had enough, because I was asked, and I had a previous appointment, which might end up being canceled. So if you didn't have enough, then I was going to say I can probably participate.
I'll leave that up to Ms. Richards.
I'd say if no one else cancels, we're probably okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. If there's nothing else, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Have a good evening, everyone. God bless.
Thank you.